Schopenhauer and Freud told us that the best we could ever do in life was not to suffer. The aim of human life was not to be miserable. I think this view is empirically wrong, morally insidious, and a political disaster. So I think what I want to do in my 25 minutes is first to say what more there might be in life than not suffering. And I'm going to call that PERMA. I'm going to say there are 5 endeavors that human beings, when non-oppressed, choose to engage in, where P is positive emotion, happiness, hedonic theories of happiness. But that's not exhaustive of what people choose, and it's not the final common path. The second is engagement, being one with the music, completely wrapped up in a conversation or with someone you love. The third is R, good relationships. The fourth is M, meaning and purpose in life. And the fifth is accomplishment. So what I'm going to suggest is that the possibility that public policy could have as a national goal, PERMA, flourishing, well-being, over and above, but not excluding, the relief of misery and suffering. I spent truth in advertising. I don't work on public policy, and I don't know anything much about groups of people. I work on individuals. And I'm going to suggest to you that within the realm of PERMA, there's enough known, surprising, and about how to build it, so one can ask the question, can you build PERMA not only in your own life, but for large groups? We'll start with P. So P is life satisfaction, contentment, subjective well-being, positive emotion, and the like. So let me just take one bit of science and then one bit of intervention that's been discovered about how to have more of that in your own life. So the question is, what's a healthy ratio of positive to negative thoughts? Question I hadn't thought about until Barbara Fredrickson came along. And what Barb did was to go to corporations and 20 flourishing economically, 20 okay, and 20 going under. And she and her group recorded every word that was said and asked the question, could you correlate the ratio of positive words to negative words in business meetings with economic flourishing? She found there was a ratio of 2.9 to 1 or greater, positive to negative, which correlated, not causal, correlated with flourishing economically between 1 and 2.9 to 1 for doing okay, and below 1 to 1 going bankrupt. And then the question is, can you have more positive emotion in life? I've spent a good part of my life doing random assignment placebo-controlled studies with drugs and psychotherapy. And when I started to work on the positive side of life, I asked, can you apply the same gold standard to interventions that people claim make people happier? So when I tell you interventions, these have gone through random assignment placebo-controlled testing. These are not just bright ideas. So for the next week, right before you go to sleep, write down 3 things that went well today. They don't have to be big things, and why they went well. So it turns out when you do a serious testing of this, 6 months later, people who do this have less depression and higher life satisfaction than appropriate controls. And importantly, it's addicting. I've been a psychotherapist all my life, all my adult life. The dirty little secret of psychotherapy and psychopharmacology is that its effects are temporary. That once you stop therapy or stop the drug, it melts. And effectiveness equals how long it takes before it melts back to zero. The nice thing about the positive psychology techniques is they're self-maintaining. So it turns out when you start doing 3 good things every night, you just keep doing it because you sleep better and the like. So that's P. E, engagement. So, interesting fact about engagement. This is what Mike Cheek sent me high calls flow. We're interested under what conditions can you have more flow in life? What are your 5 highest strengths? And what we find is that when people use their highest strengths to meet the challenges that come their way, that they go into flow. They're more engaged. One of my students studied in the library in Philadelphia until midnight and then had to walk about 3/4 of a mile through the most dangerous part of Philadelphia back to his apartment. And this was the scariest time of his day. So his highest strength was humor and playfulness. So his job was to redefine his walk home using humor and playfulness. So he bought rollerblades and a stopwatch and made it an Olympic event, and every night tried to beat his personal best. And after about 3 weeks, this was the favorite part of his day. So E, engagement. R, relationships. Marriage counseling is the most dismal form of therapy. People are lying to you, they're lying to each other. Sometimes they agree on hating you, and then things go a little better. So that's not quite a positive psychology aim. The question is how you can actually make a better marriage. So about 8 years ago, Shelley Gable and her marital counseling friends from UCLA said, let's not look at how people fight, let's look at how they celebrate together. So they asked the question, what do you say to your spouse when she comes home with been promoted at work? What do you say? And it turns, so imagine active, passive, constructive, destructive. By the way, this doesn't come naturally at all. So what I used to do until I read this literature was passive constructive, which is congratulations, dear, you deserve it. That has no effect on relationships. The drill sergeants that I work with do active destructive. You know what tax bracket that's going to put us into? Passive destructive is something like, what's for dinner? Active constructive is, I've been reading the reports you wrote to the corporation, and the one you wrote on the pension plan last month is the single best fiscal report I've read in my years in business. Now, please relive what happened with me. Exactly where were you when your boss told you you had been promoted? And exactly verbatim, what did he say? And why do you really think you were promoted? And it's a script that goes on. And what we found is that love, commitment, and loyalty go up when couples are taught this. And it's self-maintaining, it turns out. People, if you do this at work, people like you better, etc. So that's number 3. R, number 4, meaning. Meaning for me is fairly simple-minded. It's belonging to and serving something you believe is bigger than you are in life. I've worked in suicide most of my life, and suicide is a complete mess. And the reason it's a complete mess, no one ever had a large number of suicides, all of whom took the same test before. We had 84 people who killed themselves in the Army last year, all of whom took our test of psychological strengths. So we were able to ask the PERMA question, can you predict suicide? And the answer is, it turns out you can. And it surprised me because the theory is that suicide is about hopelessness. Turns out if you're in the bottom 1% of no meaning in life and my work in the Army has no purpose, roughly half those people killed themselves. So there's a red flag for suicide and has to do with the complete absence of meaning in life. Can you build meaning in life? And the answer is yes. We have depressed people or non-depressed people write their vision of a positive human future. And then to write their obituary, with depressed people we call it life summary, about through their grandchildren's eyes about what they did to forward a positive human future. And achievement, and this is what government usually measures since the Industrial Revolution, GDP and the like, but this is the question of achieving goals. So Angela Duckworth, my colleague, and I are interested in the question of who never gives up, and self-discipline. and we try to predict academic achievement from IQ and from grit. And in general, when we look at success in academia, grit, that is this never giving up and self-discipline, accounts for about twice as much of the variance as IQ. America has spelling bees. 1 million children enter these things in which you have to spell autochthonous and hard words like that. And so 2 years running, Angela took the 172 finalists, measured their IQ and measured grit, and found that both times grit, but not IQ, predicted the final four 2 years running. I've said that well-being, for me, consists in PERMA, positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And I've said that we know something about how to build that. There's actually random assignment, placebo-controlled studies with individuals. So the next question is, can you do it with larger groups than individuals? Here's the story that sort of changed my life the most. Two and a half years ago, the Chief of Staff of the United States Army called me to the Pentagon, George Casey, and he said, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicide, divorce, drug abuse, depression, anxiety, panic. What does positive psychology say about that, Dr. Seligman? And I said, sir, there's a meeting of the General Staff, that the human response to strong adversity is normally distributed. And on the left-hand side of the bell curve are the people whose lives are ruined by combat, by divorce, by trauma. And you should continue to spend $5 to $10 billion a year treating people with these problems. But the Army isn't a hospital. You're interested in psychological fitness. And you should know that the vast number of human beings are resilient from trauma. And resilience means operationally you go through a hard time, but 3 to 6 months later, by psychological and physical measures, you're back where you were. And then on the right-hand side of the distribution are the people of whom Nietzsche said, if it doesn't kill me, it makes me stronger. It's called post-traumatic growth. There's a lot of it. It's measurable. And operationally, it's usually people who go through very hard time. But a year later, by all of our psychological and physical measures, they're better off. They're stronger than they were. So my advice to you, sir, is to move the entire distribution toward post-traumatic growth. General Casey then ordered that from that day forward, positive psychology and resilience would be measured and taught throughout the entire 1.1 million person United States Army. And the second thing he said was, I'm going to create an army that's just as psychologically fit as physically fit. And the General Staff has read your work about the schools. We see that you train teachers in the